afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good night, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this eMental Health International Collaborative webinar for July 2021. We're very pleased to have you here to join us to talk about mindfulness in the digital age. Let me just tell you a little bit about our schedule for today and how we're going to run this webinar, particularly if you haven't joined us for one of these webinars previously. My name is Duncan Babbage and I'm going to be your MC for the event today. That means my primary goal is to keep out of the way of the speakers as much as possible. A little bit about my background. I am a clinical psychologist by training, worked for many years as an academic in the areas of clinical psychology training, in rehabilitation and living well with long-term disability, and in applying technology in the health sector. And so mindfulness in the digital age is a topic I'm certainly very interested in. These days, I do a range of work, including working with the eMental Health International Collaborative on things like this, and doing both software development work and strategy work around applying technology in the health sector. Now, we'd like to invite you to be participants in today's webinar, not just attendees. And the first way that we'd like you to do that is to share with other attendees your location. The way we often encourage people to do this is by hovering over your own video cube in the grid view there. And by tapping on the little three dots, you can rename yourself, your video entry on the webinar, so that we can see not just your name, but also where you're based in the world, to give people a sense right at the outset of the different people that are dialing in today. So we'd invite you to do that. The other thing is, if you're interested in hearing more from the eMental Health International Collaborative going forward about other webinars and other activities from eMHIC, we'd invite you to provide us with your email address if you're not already on that list. And you can do this in one of two ways. You can put your first and last names and your email address along with hashtag eMHIC in the chat at the bottom of the screen, or you can direct message one of our team, including Olivia Dunn or Sajal, who are here on the call if you would like to provide that information to them privately, and they'll add you to that mailing list. Now, it's good that you find that chat down at the bottom of the screen. Many of you will be familiar with Zoom's chat feature, and that's the primary way we initially capture and filter questions you might have for our four speakers. So we have four speakers that will be sharing with us today for about 10 minutes each. But a really key part of our call over the next hour and a half together is going to be the opportunity for questions and answers for the panel to discuss that and for us to reflect on the issues that have been presented. And so we invite you at any stage during the call, if you have a question that's arisen from something that is being said, to put that in the chat. That gets it onto my radar. We'll start filtering those questions, and then I'll either put those to the panel at some point during the call to the extent that I can get to all of the questions that are submitted. Or I may also invite you through direct message whether you'd be happy to put that to the panel yourself. Well, that's the logistics. Now let's talk about the call itself or today's webinar. And to do that, I'm going to hand over first to Christine Morgan, who is the CEO of the National Mental Health Commission in Australia, but also importantly in terms of today's event, she is the board chair of the eMental Health International Collaborative. Christine.
Thank you, Duncan, and good morning from Australia, good evening, good afternoon. I think one of the wonderful things, as we always know about these webinars that are organised through eMHIC, is it's an opportunity for us to reach out globally. So can I say to you firstly, welcome. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands upon which all of us are meeting around the world. For myself here in Canberra, it's the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I also pay my respects to all of us and all of those we live and work with who know the reality of mental ill health, mental illness and suicide. So thank you for joining us today. I love these webinars. As I said, they're not only an opportunity for us to join in with all of our colleagues from around the world, but also to be really challenged in some interesting and new areas. And today's conversation and presentations around mindfulness through the lens of eMental health, I don't think could be more pertinent or more timely. Here in Australia, we've actually started a public conversation around what we are calling pandemic fatigue. And it is the reality of the cumulative effect of all that has been associated with COVID-19, how all of us have had to learn to live with it, to live under and with the lockdowns and the restrictions that go with it, the way it's constrained our ability to live what was a normal life before COVID. And we're certainly seeing here in Australia that that pandemic fatigue, that kind of much lower base each time we go through lockdowns or restrictions, to actually be able to find that mental resilience to really draw on ourselves and get through it again and get through it again and get through it again. So we're certainly all feeling it here in Australia, and I'm going to guess that is probably pretty typical around the world. So when we're looking at that issue of pandemic fatigue, I was thinking this morning how wonderful to actually be able to use eMental health. And we heard in our opening video about how one of the most significant features of eMental health is its ability to collapse down geographical and other barriers to people accessing services and supports for their mental health. Mindfulness has to be one of the most brilliant interventions that I certainly have come across in mental health. I think it just not only helps in that direct way with our mental health, but in so many ways of being able to build our coping facilities as we go through life. And as I've just said, what a challenge life still is. So welcome today to a topic which I think is highly pertinent, highly timely, and where to learn how we can access this wonderful mindfulness through the mechanisms of eMental health will just be, I think, something that opens up further avenues for all of us. So thank you for being with us, and let's go on a journey for the next 90 minutes, which I think will be really stimulating and insightful. Thank you.
Now I'm going to invite the Executive Director of the eMental Health International Collaborative, Professor Anil Taplial, to welcome
you. Kia ora and greetings from New Zealand. eMental health has been forefront of everyone's mind for the last 18 months. Initial sort of people's perceptions about eMental health is it's all about apps, it's about websites, it's about looking at the highly profiled initiatives which are CBT-based interventions around prevention, self-help, self-management tools, around treatment. But all of a sudden, what we find is the majority of the conversations around mental health and addiction. And sometimes mindfulness, while it's been there, it's never been at the forefront. It's there and as a wide adoption, not just in some countries, but around the world. And we got some of the world's leading authorities on this subject here today and what it's got to do with eMental health. And so much looking forward to sharing that knowledge and wisdom. As much as we are sharing it, I think we are also seeking contribution from each one of you. So let's start this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. Well, I'm very pleased to welcome our first speaker now to address us, Dr. Craig Hassard. Dr. Hassard has been working with the Faculty of Medicine at Monash University since 1989. He's coordinator of mindfulness programs across Monash and is director of education at the Monash Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies. His teaching, research, and clinical interests include mindfulness, mind-body medicine, lifestyle medicine, integrative medicine, and medical ethics. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Hassard's other commitments mean that he can't stay with us for the Q&A at the end of the call. So if you have questions for him, please be prompt at putting them forward. We'll have a few minutes for questions with him immediately after he speaks. Dr. Hassard.
Well, thank you very much to everybody for the invitation. It's a great event, and I'm just going to speak a little bit about our contribution at Monash to e-learning, particularly in the space of mindfulness. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of one aspect of that, and that is our MOOCs, massive online open courses that we've been delivering since 2015. And certainly Monash has been a very supportive environment to deliver these kinds of interventions. So I'm just going to share my screen and just quite quickly walk you through some aspects of this. First thing, in terms of delivering mindfulness, face-to-face versus online delivery. Now, mindfulness is traditionally, and for thousands of years, been delivered, of course, face-to-face. and mostly small group, although you can have certainly large groups. And there are a lot of advantages of that. And I think the key advantages are the amount of learner support and pastoral care you can provide when you're in the room with the person and you're actually picking up quite subtle things in time, can have conversations outside of group, and just that kind of support is a very valuable part of it, as is the modeling of mindfulness by the teacher, by the interactions in the room. And of course, there's all of that intimacy of learning from the group and being in a small group. But there are certainly benefits of online delivery to provide something for an international audience. And indeed, like this webinar today, much more possible, and it's scalable. And of course, relatively low cost to deliver and to maintain the course. And it's much easier in a lot of ways to deliver it. But there are drawbacks, and we're very conscious in developing our online learning that to be aware of what these drawbacks are. For example, superficial learning, just giving a bit of text and giving a guided practice and so on. And people may not be taking that deep dive. It may not have the ability to ask deeper questions when they're struggling with difficulties, etc. So it leads on to the pastoral care. We're very conscious that if we're delivering online learning in mindfulness, that people with all sorts of personal issues or mental health history could be doing these courses, and we may not be able to give them the support they would otherwise want. And we're very conscious that this should not, and we tell people right from the start that this is not a replacement for mental health care. It might be helpful for people who've had mental health problems in the past, and for certain mental health problems, and like past history of depression or anxiety. But as an acute intervention, we did not design it to be that. And we give advice on multiple occasions. If you're struggling with things, if there are any concerns, please, you need to see your mental health professional. So this is not designed to replace that, although it might be a good adjunct, or it might be a good sort of extra learning that a person might have, or for mild conditions. Asynchronous, it's convenient. Of course, synchronous learning, there's much more possibility for interaction, but the convenience of asynchronous learning is certainly a big positive. And one of the things that sometimes on discussion forums, trolling and negative comments, we had to be very careful in trying to minimize any impact of that. So we went into the studio, that's myself and my colleague Richard Chambers at Monash. So we're partners in crime in all of our mindfulness and Monash work that we do. And so we started developing this course. And so in 2015, we built our first massive online open courses working with the UK Future Learn platform. And right from the start, we started to get a lot of very positive feedback. And I think, and I'll go through some of perhaps the reasons why and how we built the course that helped it to be that way. And indeed, the two mindfulness MOOCs that we've developed are both in the top 10 online MOOCs of all time for any subject, not for mindfulness, for any subject. They're the two top ranked mindfulness MOOCs. So I'll just share with you some of what I think are the key reasons why. So firstly, the course structure, and I'm not going to teach people here, know much more about developing online learning than myself in terms of aesthetic and format and so on, but it wants to be simple and very user-friendly. Building steps progressively from simple to more complex, and so that you're really taking a person on a journey over a 4-week period. That's how long the courses are. Over a 4-week period, it's a journey, and each step logically follows on from the ones before. Looking at the applications of mindfulness, and there could be all sorts of applications, whether it's dealing with work pressures or study pressures, cultivating self-compassion, managing stress. So we explore lots of applications and lots of experiential learning, lots of experiments that people do. And we build up and extending the length of the practice as time goes on. We provide, there's lots of different media, short videos, carefully curated articles. So there's further learning for people who are interested, links to other websites and useful resources and apps. guided practices that are downloadable and available. And I should say these courses free, or these courses are free, so no cost to do them. Quizzes so people can test their learning. So lots of different formats and ways of learning. Now, the really important parts of the pastoral care and our care of the students or the learners is the moderated forums. So every day, 2 hours a day, we have qualified psychologists going over providing support, responding to questions, giving some targeted advice when people might be struggling. And that could include sometimes, perhaps you need to, see somebody about these concerns you've expressed. And so we very much encourage people not to over-declare in these forums. And also the moderation helps to prevent any trolling as well. So it's a carefully curated but very supportive learner environment. And so the learners really start to form a community. Helps to keep people on track, respond to questions. And every day, learners are getting that kind of support. And that's one of the most popular parts of the course. And then the weekly feedback videos. So we're conscious that people might be struggling with various aspects. So based on the key questions and themes that have come up in these discussion forums, myself and my colleague Richard Chambers would do a weekly feedback video. And we would just be straight to camera and this is an interesting point that's come up, or this is a challenge that a number of people. And so people actually really have a sense that they're not just looking at a screen and clicking on, looking at various text and so on. They know that somebody is at the other end listening and responding to questions, concerns, challenges, providing extra guidance. And so people are walking the journey, and although it's online, they feel like they're walking that journey with somebody. And that's one of the most important popular parts of the courses. And now that's being adopted by a lot of other online courses. So every week we film those. We've had some quite big numbers, starting off 51,000 people. Now, of course, on a FutureLearn platform, there's so many 100,000 people that are on that platform. And so after a while, everybody who's interested in mindfulness on that platform has sort of still been doing it. So we would tend to get, say, on a regular basis, about 12,000. And so when COVID started off, it jumped back up to about 25,000 people doing that first run of the course during COVID. So we've had close to 500,000 people do these courses. I won't talk about the evaluation, but we're interested to, I'll just say a couple of words, that we looked at things like work engagement, perceived stress, self-compassion, pro-sociality. What we've found is that this course has made significant improvements in all of these domains. And we're almost surprised to find how much benefit people found from doing these courses in terms of the things that we've measured. People could measure pre and post using validated scales. And we've certainly been very encouraged with that. So that's all I'll say, and perhaps we'll just open up now for questions, and I'll hand back to Duncan to perhaps curate those questions, and happy to share any other experience I've got that might be helpful.
Wow, I'm just struck by over 500,000 people have been through the courses. That's remarkable, particularly in the context of providing a free service. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on the selling point for these services then. Clearly, reaching 500,000 people is unquestionably remarkable. Often people also expect the delivery of these kinds of programs to be cheaper than delivering through some other avenue, or maybe that becomes a moot point in the context of 500,000 people. But what are your thoughts on what the right level of resourcing is to argue to really deliver something that sounds like it's quite comprehensive, like you're providing here? Yes,
we wanted accessibility, availability. We didn't want, so we made this free, and I've got to take my hat off to Monash to be so supportive, to put the resources behind developing it, and then to make it freely available. People can pay something at the end of the course that if they want to have permanent access to all the content and get a certificate of completion. And we do get a small amount of income from that when people do that. But Our main issue really was that we wanted people to have accessibility. It's very cost efficient, even when we get approached by an organization saying, that online course, could you run it for us in our organization, in our workplace? We've got 100 people or 200 people that like to do that course. So we can have a closed run of the course, as we call it, and it's just for members of that organization or workplace. Even then, it's very, very cost effective to deliver that. And I think that that's one of the very attractive things about it. But as I said before, we don't want it to get to the point where it's cheap healthcare and it's replacing that more personalised one-on-one care and support that people sometimes need for more significant mental health issues.
You've got the best kind of endorsement here in the chat from Janet Gray, who's in Melbourne, who says, just like to confirm as a participant, the courses are brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Nice to have that endorsement. We have a question from Dr. Addie Wooten, who you'll be hearing from later, but why don't you put your question to Craig? Oh, sorry, I've hit the wrong button just as I said that and muted it. Go
Thanks,
ahead.
Duncan. You're tripping me up. Craig, really brilliant presentation, and the MOOCs are wonderful. I'm really curious to understand why you think there's such great uptake and what the benefits are for students in that tertiary setting. Like, why is mindfulness so important in that tertiary experience, or for students in a university context?
Well, look, I think that the world today needs mindfulness for lots of reasons. We're being driven to distraction, technology, overload, social isolation, mental health stress problems going. So in many ways, I think the rise of popularity of mindfulness is like an antidote to many of the problems with modern life. So that's just more broadly, we're in that context. These courses, these MOOCs, are not just, they are delivered by universities all around the world, but they're not just they're open to anybody who wants to do them. But I think people are searching for that need. And I think why these courses have been so successful is because of that support, because of developing in as much as we can in an online world to develop that sense of community, that sense of walking a journey together, and the kind of pastoral care and support that we provide. So people, I think, very much personally engage with the program because we realize there's a potential great distance that the online sort of environment has. We've had people from, I think, last count it was 173 countries. It's like, are there that many countries in the world? It's like people from all around the world, but this is an English-speaking course, but we have translated it into Spanish as well, and you know, just based on demand. But I think it's that care, and it's popular because we try and make it practical to meet the needs that people have expressed in their working life, in their personal life. So we really contextualize it very, very carefully to make it practical and accessible.
We're always so short on time here. We've only really got about 1 more minute in this part of the Q&A. So I'm going to combine 2 questions, one from Judith Drake and one from Liz Asser, which I think are related. Judith asked, do you have any advice for how to support people to stay engaged with their mindfulness practice after they've completed their 4-week course, whether that's face-to-face or if they're doing it online? And whereas Liz was asking, what about other ongoing supports? Does the program or elements of the course provide referral options to support further external help seeking?
Well, with such a very diverse group from countries all over the world, we can't possibly try and link people up with mental health services, etc. We give the start and during and reminders and so on. Please, if you've got concerns, you know, seek mental health advice. Sometimes we'll give extra links to good resources. Questions come up, links to, you know, resources on compassion and so on. So we'll often, based on people's questions and needs, provide those extra links or those extra bits of advice, those extra bits of evidence and readings and so on if people are interested. Maintaining the practice. So the second course, Maintaining a Mindful Life, is very much about that. And what's going to help this person to maintain the mindfulness in their day-to-day life? The informal aspects of being mindful in day-to-day life tends to be very well maintained. The formal practice tends to wax and wane a little bit according to need. There are 2 main things: adversity and complacency. Oh, I'm okay now, I don't need it, and the person drops off their practice. Like saying, I'm fit now, I don't need to do any more exercise. And very often things go back to where they were before, and the person kind of gets their own internal reminder, I need to maintain this practice in the longer run. So we give lots of tips and a kind of how-to sheets about that and so on. I'd be very happy to pass them on. If you're interested, just contact me at Monash and I'll share that with you.
Thank you very much for that invitation for people. And on that note, always pressed for time and we need to move on to our next speaker, but thank you very much, Dr. Hassad, for your contributions. Well, our next speaker is the Adjunct Professor, Associate Professor Angie Chu, who's the CEO of the Brahm Center in Singapore. She teaches courses including mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and mindfulness for enhanced performance, and gives a variety of talks on managing emotions and trauma. She was named Singaporean of the Year 2019 by Straits Times for her work in mental health, and is also an Adjunct Associate Professor of Mindfulness at the National University of Singapore. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Duncan, and a very good afternoon to all of you in New Zealand and Australia. It's morning here. I'm very honored to be invited to join this platform. I would say that when COVID came into existence and Singapore faced the shutdown way back in early part of 2020, we very quickly transitioned onto the technology platform. And this enabled us to ensure that we were still able to deliver our programs and services online, including mindfulness, including yoga and whatever courses that we were offering, and also the health talks that we were conducting every Saturday that was free for the entire population. Now, in those days, due to physical constraint, we could only have perhaps 50 people in a room. Of course, they were like tightly squeezed. And then with social distancing, we can only fit probably 20 if we have people coming in. So going onto the Zoom platform, making it e-talks was a great avenue to be able to reach far more people, and it opened up to the rest of the world. So it wasn't only people living in Singapore that could get access to the talks, but also people who were living in the UK and Australia and any parts around the world. So we saw that as a huge opportunity to change the delivery of the services as well as the programs. We also launched the counseling service to the population that included through WhatsApp. And what we found is a lot of young people don't really want to be face-to-face. They want to communicate through WhatsApp because that's their mode of communication. While it is effective in supporting them, I would say there are still limitations because in any therapeutic relationship, a personal face-to-face relationship does help in supporting their recovery. But what we have been able to do was to help prevent a few of them from actually taking their own lives. Because when the signal came that they were very serious and they were about to end their life, we very quickly activated the police, who had to physically arrive at their doorstep to rescue them. So I think in any of the technology-based work that we do, we need to complement with a real human that is going to be providing personal care. So with the technology available for us to be able to conduct retreats jointly with other mindfulness teachers, including Dr. Craig Hassad, whom I have been conducting a few retreats and courses with, we did it in a hybrid mode. So while Craig was speaking over Zoom, I would be on site with the group and to lead the practices and also to provide the support that is personal in nature. Because over Zoom, there's no way we can really pick up all the signs of any of the distress or them or detecting any of their self-harm marks or even an eczema breakout on their skin, which is a sign of distress. So I think we can't just depend on technology wholly. We need to complement that with still a personal touch and presence. So when we organized the Singapore Mindfulness Conference since 2018, 2018, we saw 900 people showing up in the auditorium. Subsequent year at the NUS Cultural Center, we had over 1,000. But when we had to move it online, we had 3,000 people attending. This was last year. And as a result of that, we transformed it to the Asia Pacific Mindfulness Conference, which will be held next month from the 14th. And we're stretching over 3 weekends because it's virtual. And we have seen over 6,000 registrations. So there are definitely new opportunities provided by going onto the technology platform. We've also been able to conduct mindfulness workshops for teachers and students, despite the fact that we can't step into the schools due to the COVID restrictions. But this has also helped us to reach out to far more people. And most recently, the Public Service Division has engaged us to present 4 mindfulness workshops to the entire government. And this will be happening on 4 Mondays in August. So none of this would have been possible if not for going into the e-space, and to also support ongoing practices, like what somebody was asking, how do you help someone keep on practicing? And that is to create the e-platform where someone can sign on in the evening or early in the morning as part of a group on a Zoom platform to practice together. I would like to still caution that if we are dealing with someone who is who has suffered from trauma, that it is still really important to have the face-to-face contact, because if someone breaks down or the person even goes into a convulsion, it is really hard to support someone over electronic platform. So I think there are tremendous amount of opportunities, but we need to use this platform wisely and to ensure that we stay responsible in how we deliver the programs and services. Thank you, Duncan. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A with the panel at the end. So we're going to move straight now to our next speaker. And that next speaker will be Dr. Bruce Arrell, who is a professor of general practice and primary healthcare at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and has been a practicing GP for 41 years. During that time, he has published more than 300 peer-reviewed publications. He also does special consultations using focused acceptance and commitment therapy, and was recently awarded the Accident Compensation Corporation Supreme Award in the New Zealand 2021 Primary Healthcare Awards for his X-factor traits of ingenuity, humility, and generosity. As you can tell, we wrote this bio, not Dr. Arrell, given that award, and we're very pleased to introduce him now to speak to you. Dr. Arrell.
Okay, well, kia ora tātou, everybody, and I'm just checking that my slides are on the screen there.
They are indeed, we can see them.
So I thought I'd just go back through my history, but also just to acknowledge Craig, because Craig came over to New Zealand about 15, 20 years ago and worked with some of my colleagues to set up mindfulness work with our medical students. And I've had 2 of them with me today who have been the beneficiaries of that. So Craig's work has spread across the Tasman. So he's not here to thank, but I just thought I'd acknowledge that. So in the early 90s, I got quite interested in the work of John Kabat-Zinn, who was the person who sort of, as you know, put mindfulness into the healthcare sector. And I was very interested in the whole issue around mindfulness and mood, and some of the more recent trials showing that you can prevent relapse of depression from using mindfulness cognitive behavioral therapy. So, and back in the early days, I got myself some mindfulness programs, and I used to put them on CDs and hand them out. We may have to remind some people what a CD is, because that's probably getting real old technology now. The only downside of the internet, of course, in those days I gave people a present, and people like getting a physical present. And now I just give them a website to go to. And I'll tell you the website that we use at Auckland University that was set up by Fiona Moyer and Tony Fernando, who are the people that Craig worked with here. But I just thought I'd tell you about a Catholic patient who came to see me one day, and she was very distressed. And I said, well, would you like to try some mindfulness? And she sort of did this. No, that's an Eastern religion, Buddhist, and I'm a Catholic and I can't possibly do that. And so I backed off. And she came back a few weeks later, also very, very uptight. So I said, okay, look, I've got a spare room. The mindfulness program was on my phone. I put the earbuds in and said, I want you to lie down here for half an hour and listen to a body scan and see how you felt. She came back into the room 35 minutes later and said, that's the most relaxed I've been in years. So I certainly won her heart and mind at the same stage. I have learned to ask people what they know about mindfulness, because I had a slightly bad experience with a policeman in the early days. And I sort of mentioned to him about mindfulness and he didn't know much about it. And as I went on, he seemed to be getting increasingly suspicious of me. And I realized he was not open to the possibility of mindfulness. So although I have to say in recent years, I find many people have heard about it. It's not, it's not the old Buddhist stuff anymore. It really has become mainstream around people. As I said, Craig had done that work with our students in Auckland, and that's been pretty amazing. Fiona Moyer and Tony Fernando have set up the Calm website at Auckland. So that's www.calm.auckland.ac.nz. It's got a whole lot of mindfulness things there. And I think good on the University of Auckland, they were willing to put their name at the end of it. That was pretty big for them. And I think Fiona and Tony had to work very hard at that. Apparently Craig, one of Craig's most powerful interventions was to tell my colleagues how to deal with some of the old school surgeons and heavy duty doctors who were a little bit anti this touchy feely stuff. And they said, show them data and show them sort of testimonials. And they just stuck to the data. So although there was a lot of antibodies to the idea of doing this, they won over the faculty. And that was about 15 years ago. And, I think the faculty is much more flexible these days than back in the older days. But one of the lovely meditations I've got, and I've given it to Anil, who can email it out to you if you like. It's A Loving Kindness by Sharon Salzberg. And she's the go-to woman, go-to mindfulness person for Barbara Fredrickson, who's the positive psychology person in the United States. And we organized for her to come out in 2011. And Sharon's her go-to person. And this is a loving kindness meditation, and I say to my patients, when the world's getting on top of me, I'm driving in my car, I put Sharon on 5 minutes, and she talks about where my attention is and what am I doing now. And what's nice about the loving kindness meditation, if you don't know what they are, you say to yourself, may I be safe, may I be healthy, may I be happy, may I live with ease. And I'm interested in acceptance and commitment therapy. And I think the key thing is to learn that the suffering is inevitable in life, but we can try and live with ease. And I think living with ease is a nice word because it sort of implies that you can't be completely free of distress or suffering. We just all have to have that. That's the human condition. But what's really nice about the loving kindness meditation is you can go from doing it to yourself, to a stranger, and then to somebody you don't like very much, which I think is very pro-social. So you work your way from somebody you love in your family to yourself, to a stranger, to someone you don't like. And actually, I find that a very powerful technique. It makes me a better human. It lets me off the hook, basically. I'm just going to say the last thing I've got very interested in is Eckhart Tolle and his present moment stuff, which is sort of, I think, mindfulness. And he talks about clock time, which is now. So clock time is a good thing to be in, versus psychological time, which is the past, about which you can be angry and upset and resentful and regretful about, or the future when you're worried about what's going to happen in the future. So I've been teaching many of my patients about that now. So a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist said, just ask yourself, Bruce, where you are in the present moment. And I find if I am getting a little bit worked up about things, I find that a very useful centering thing. I come right back to the present moment, and I find that a lot of that distress goes. So I use mindfulness in my practice. One of the things I like about ACT is it does have the mindfulness component to it, and it does have the other side of ACT is the values stuff, which is pretty good. So so Duncan, I think I've come in under time. I don't know whether that's allowed, but
it's most certainly allowed. Well, thank you very much for that contribution, and we'll return to you with the panel in a short while. I just was reflecting on that as an MC, the idea of staying in the present and not thinking about the future or the past. Very difficult thing to do in the MC role, but I look forward to starting that in about 50 minutes time.
Yeah, you've got a different clock time.
Yes, I think I could do with some mindfulness, but right now I'm going to focus on the very near future. And that very near future is Dr. Addie Wooten, who is the CEO of Smiling Mind in Australia and a clinical psychologist by background. Addie brings her extensive background in clinical psychology, research, and e-health to her position as CEO of Smiling Mind. She is a well-known leader in her field, publishing widely and speaking at a range of events from corporate settings to schools and governments. And today we're very pleased to say also to our webinar. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I'm coming from today in Victoria, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. It's wonderful to be here with such a diverse panel and a diverse community of people tuning in from all around the world. It's really exciting to see such interest. I am going to talk to you about Smiling Mind and the work that we do with Smiling Mind. I will share my screen, but I'll try not to use it too much because I think it will hopefully be a better story if I talk with you rather than at you. I'm a clinical psych by background as well, and spent most of my clinical life in big hospitals, as many of the other speakers have reflected on, and the context of working with people with physical challenges. Interesting point, I think, Bruce, that you raised around the convincing the older traditional establishment around the benefits of mindfulness. I was first introduced to mindfulness. Well, actually, I was first introduced to mindfulness when I was a child by my amazing parents, but then later in my career, introduced to mindfulness in the context of working with people with cancer. And we really struggled to convince the surgeons that we worked with that this was a useful practice to bring into their clinical environment. But amazingly over time, I think you're right, the power of the data really spoke to their sense of understanding the science and coming on board. And we even got quite a few of the surgeons along to our mindfulness sessions over time, which is really great to see. That period of my life, though, inspired a real interest in technology, because we could see that there was a huge barrier for people accessing psychological support. A huge amount of stigma still exists around accessing tools and resources. And so that led me down a pathway of exploring, well, how can we use technology to overcome some of those barriers? Not to solve all the problems, and I agree with earlier comments that technology definitely doesn't replace the face-to-face element, but it provides a pathway, I think, for people to access. And that led me to Smiling Mind. So I joined Smiling Mind back in 2015. And we are an organisation that really exists to provide digital tools and resources to as many people as possible that they can use in their everyday lives to support good mental health and well-being outcomes. We started with mindfulness. So what most people know Smiling Mind for is our mindfulness app. And you can see on the screen, hopefully you can see on the screen, that we've reached about 6.3 million people through that mindfulness app. We launched back in 2012, and over the last 9 or 10 years, we've grown and grown. We're set up as a not-for-profit, which means that we're a little bit different to some of the other mindfulness app providers that are out there. And the biggest difference really is that we don't have any money for promotion and marketing. And so we rely on, I suppose, referral between people that have used the app and word of mouth to engage people. And so that means that the 6.3 million people that have downloaded the app have heard from somebody else primarily, or from a health professional. About 25% of the people that use the app have come from referral from a health professional. We work across a whole range of different areas. So I'll quickly talk to you about how we use technology to introduce mindfulness in a couple of different settings. Our goal, our driving force, I suppose, as an organisation is really around reaching children and young people to equip them with skills that they can use for the rest of their life. And we take a mindfulness-based approach with that. So introducing the concepts of mindfulness as early as we can, obviously with younger kids, as simply as possible, and introducing ideas and concepts in a developmentally appropriate way. When you go into the Smiling Mind app, you'll see that there are lots of developmentally appropriate staged programs for different ages and different topic areas. And our goal over the last 5 years has been to reach 5 million Australian children and young people through our app-based programs and our school-based programs. And we've just hit that target, the 5 million target, which is really exciting. But more broadly, globally, we've reached more than 7 million children and young people through our app-based programs and our school-based programs. So if I can continue on with this slide, we work in a couple of different areas. And we use technology across all of these areas in different ways. So the app is our primary product or program that we provide free of charge. It's a freely accessible app. But we use that app in conjunction with a whole range of other programs and resources in our different settings. We really try and engage people at an individual level. So most of the people that use the app are coming as an individual. They're curious about mindfulness. They want to understand how they can use mindfulness in their everyday life. And as Bruce and Angie have commented, introduce structure and guidance to how they can go through a meditation practice, particularly for beginners. That guidance is really important. And then at a system level, we're trying to introduce or add in other resources that can be embedded into the systems where people spend the majority of their time. And for us, that's at school, at home, and in the workplace. So in the school setting, where we're trying to support predominantly Australian schools with resources that teachers can use to introduce mindfulness to their students. So our approach really is around training teachers, making sure that teachers have adequate knowledge and confidence and skills to start to introduce mindfulness concepts to their students. We've written a mindfulness-based social and emotional learning curriculum, which is, again, developmentally appropriate across the years of the primary school sector in Australia and mapped to the Australian curriculum. And then we provide training to teachers. And as Angie mentioned, prior to COVID, we would have gone into schools and trained teachers face-to-face, and we have a whole range of different psychologists that actually deliver those training programs. But what we've done over this pandemic is to transition that to a fully digital experience. And so the opportunity for us to reach teachers through technology has been fantastic. We've actually started running a program that's really focused on regional, rural and remote schools across Australia, and we've seen enormous uptake over the last year. We have a digital hub for teachers as well that allows teachers to log in and access these teaching resources, all of the guided meditations and the lesson plans. And then at home, we focus on supporting parents to think about how they can bring mindfulness into their home environment. Again, that's family-based meditation programs that sit within the app, but also other technology that we've started to explore, and that one being our Google Home integration. So integrating with the technology that lots of homes are starting to bring in, and that is that voice activated technology where you can ask the Google Home device to play a meditation. That's gone really well. It's been an interesting experiment, but it means that it makes it easy for families to think about how they can bring mindfulness into their routine at home. And then in the workplace context, we run a whole range of programs in businesses to teach employees about mental health and wellbeing and how mindfulness can support their wellbeing. Again, it's a dual approach with an app-based program in addition to training, historically face-to-face and now virtually through live online delivery and webinar. And again, we've seen workplaces, particularly with the change in the way that we work, particularly in Victoria, here in Australia, a lot of working from home has been the case for the last year. And so being able to support employees through that digital platform has been really important for businesses. And it's been great that we've been able to support them. So I'm probably running out of time. I think the biggest thing that we have seen has been around the engagement and uptake with these digital platforms. We never thought that our mindfulness app would be as popular as it has been. I think that's a testament to the real interest in mindfulness, as the previous speakers have alluded to, but also the growing, I suppose, integration of technology in our day-to-day lives. It's normal for us to use technology in lots of different aspects. And if we can do that in a really good experience way to introduce mindfulness using technology, then I think it adds a huge amount of value and hopefully supports better mental health outcomes for a whole range of people. So I might stop there and hand over to Duncan to facilitate questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, let me just arrange a few things here to bring our panel alongside me. So if you haven't already posted a question, but you have one, please feel free to find that chat button at the bottom of the screen, or perhaps on your toolbar, depending on what kind of device you are dialing in on, and fire it through. We have some existing questions that have been put to us, and I also always have questions myself, but I'm going to pass over first to one of our attendees who has a question in the chat, and that is Nerida Lennon.
Hi, yeah, thank you for hosting the event, and thank you to all the panelists. It's been really interesting. As every panelist was speaking, but particularly Angie was speaking about online versus offline, and I'm interested in what your perspectives are around what makes an effective and blended model, so online and in person, for mindfulness courses to maintain that efficacy or continuity of care, basically.
I think, to be fair, there are people who have been able to learn mindfulness online, as well as using an app like the Smiling Mind or Calm, a Headspace. But having said that, I do have people coming to the courses and said they have tried to use the app, but they were not going anywhere with them. So there's always going to be a mix of people who are able to or who aren't able to. As far as doing a hybrid model, especially when it comes to retreat, because it's over 3 days or 5 days, I think it's really important to have a teacher that is on site to co-teach the program. So when I did it with Craig Hassett or with David Treleaven and coming up with Judson Brewer, what happens is that they will only be appearing 1 or 2 hours in the morning, and then I will be instructing the rest of the day. But there are people who are attending it over Zoom for the entire period, and they seem to take that very well. So it's going to be pretty much on the individual. I don't think I would be able to generalize completely, but certainly one has to be very present and to tune in to people who are on site, as well as possibly the people who are on Zoom. And what happens is sometimes they turn off the camera, and we have to at least check in with them if they're okay, because we don't know whether they turn it off because they're taking a break or they're turning off because they are breaking down. I hope that helped.
Other panel members got thoughts there?
I'm just going to make a comment. I was doing one of the first phone calls I did over COVID, and this woman who I'd never met. She was about 32. Never met her, so I didn't know what she looked like. She burst into tears on the phone. If that happens in the office, I'm completely au fait for doing it, but it was quite different when I couldn't see her. It was actually quite distressing for me to know what was happening. So I can appreciate what you were saying there, Angie, that if people turn their camera off, suddenly you've lost a whole way of actually communicating with people. So I felt completely thrown by it. So
it does feel like in some ways. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we both are done.
Eddie, did you have something you were about to add there?
No, I would say I agree. It's complex, and they're like from a Smiling Mind perspective, there are different approaches that we'll take depending on the programs that we're running. And I think Angie's right that having those specialist people that can actually check in with people is really important. From an app perspective, we don't have that human element. Obviously, people can reach out to us and we will talk to them if they proactively reach out to us, but we've also built in mechanisms to create automated processes if people are flagging signs that we're concerned about, particularly when we're collecting data or information from users. So yeah, there's a whole range of different things I think that we have to be aware of when we're building tools like this that will help support and connect with people.
One of the questions that's been put in the chat, which I was asked to put to the panel, is specifically around meeting standards for whichever local environment you're operating in. So specifically for you, Addie, the question from Judith Drake was just wondering if Smiling Mind meets the NSQD MHS standards, which is useful when recommending to others. And then perhaps more generally, we can move on from there to a discussion about standards approaches for these kinds of interventions and for mindfulness in general.
Yeah, there's quite a few standards, I think, in Australia. The standards that question refers to, we haven't explicitly mapped against, but yes, we do meet a whole range of different criteria or different standards as part of that. Some don't apply around some clinical, more health-related standards there. But yes, we try and take like a whole range of factors that we consider in terms of data privacy and security, engaging consumers in the development of our programs, making sure that we have explicit pathways of referral and recommendation. It's interesting, there are different standards that apply to different levels of intervention as well. The Smiling Mind program was developed as a health promotion tool. It's not a clinical intervention, similar to what Craig was saying earlier on in this presentation. But it's interesting, I think one of the challenges working in the eMental health space is that even if you have that intention that you're developing a tool that isn't a clinical intervention, it can often be used by people who really do need that level of clinical intervention. So how do you manage that pathway, especially when we know that 25% of our users have come from recommendation from a health professional, and it may be being used in an adjunct role with another clinical intervention. So one of the areas that we're really interested in Australia, well, in the context of our work in Australia, is how do we more explicitly connect with those other services so that there is a way for us to talk to each other in some way, obviously without negating our privacy requirements, but how do we help build a system? And I think the technology platform and the eMental health space is a really interesting space here that we, how do we connect more efficiently? How do we use technology to help people in a more integrated way, rather than one person getting a piece of advice here and that not translating to what their experience is like over at another platform? So that's a big problem, I think, for us to tackle, and an area that we're really interested in trying to figure out how we can contribute to that.
reflections from other panel members?
I am truly impressed by what Eddie has achieved with the Smiling Mind, and I hope that there's some way we can do some collaboration to make the app even more popular beyond Australia.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I failed to mention that about 40% of our users are international, so outside of Australia. So it's really interesting to see that growth beyond Australia. But yeah, we're always, for anyone on the call, we're always open to collaborating, whether that be like a collaboration in terms of helping reach more people, or from an academic research perspective. We're always really interested in how we can collaborate with others.
Great, thank you. We'll be
Bruce
following
has
up.
his hand up for sure. Is that a volunteer to collaborate, or?
I just want to make a few comments. I think as Adi says, people do, GPs do like referring to these various situations. And I think even if people find them de novo themselves, there's an enormous capacity for humans to self-heal. They can get themselves back in the river of life. So, I mean, I can imagine sometimes it wouldn't be the best thing, but I think most times it's going to be a useful thing for people to do. So I was just going to say, with Craig and Eddie, I am awestruck by the size of what you are. A big country, that's for sure, but you sure do things on a big scale. So congratulations. That is where we're just gasping at the numbers you were mentioning here. But the other thing I was just going to say, from Angie's thing, we provide continuing education to GPs, and COVID has actually socialized the sector to doing things online. We would get 700 or 800 people to our webinars. We're now getting 1,400. So there's been a big switch out there, people realizing, well, they can actually sit at home. They don't have to drive across town. They can have a glass of wine and do something online without all the extra hassle. So I think COVID has ushered in a new era. I think from here on, there's going to be much more acceptance of online things. So you know, it's been great to see what you guys are doing.
I only got sparkling water. I'm not quite sure how I missed out on the wine, but it's good to know that a glass of wine might be an option. Used in
without alcohol.
Mindful moderation. Yes, well, that's probably very wise. I think the issue of standards is a very interesting question, isn't it? Because clearly, especially in an area like mindfulness, we know that this is an intervention that's as much focused on wellness in the general population as it is on specific clinical context, let alone as a regulated clinical intervention of any kind. And yet so much formal research shows its value in the context of delivering a clinical health service. I note the regulatory authorities have been encouragingly hands-off with not trying to restrict things that are outside of their scope in these sorts of developments. But it does leave the question that we see in the chat here of saying sometimes it's just so hard to know what to recommend to people because there are so many options out there. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the ways of surfacing good tools, both for clinicians and people in the general public.
Well, I could take a stab at this. I think it's no different from physical health, where there is a full range of medication and vitamins and all sorts of other aids and suggestions, including TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, herbs, or whatever. So I think with the mind, there will be also a range of and variety of intervention approaches, whether it's an app or a particular approach of mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, or any other adaptation. I think what is becoming something that people realize is how much of our thinking is really causing the problem. And in the past, it's always trying to change the formulation in the brain. But, if it's like if somebody keeps hitting the arm against the wall, no matter how much bandage you put on it, and it gets better and you remove it, and then the guy keep banging again against the wall, it's just going to end up getting the arm bruised. And that's exactly what we're doing with this mind. If we're not aware of what other thoughts are really damaging our sense of calm and our sense of being in control and centered. So when earlier on someone mentioned about, this is not normal, but what is normal? 30 years ago, we didn't travel the way that we do now. 50 years ago, I mean, who was thinking of flying to Australia? Well, not 50, maybe 60 or 70 years ago. I remember my time has flown by. I mean, my mother had to take a boat to Sydney with my little brother who was going there for his studies, and it took them a few weeks to reach Sydney. And now we're just flying all over the place. And of course, now we got two rich kids flying to the space to entertain themselves and adding a whole lot more pollution into our air, right? So what is normal? I think things keep changing. And if people can't accept, and that's why acceptance is such a big part of the attitude we're to develop in mindfulness, is if we can't accept the new norm that is constantly evolving, that is what's causing the problem. It's not the changes around us that's causing the problem. It's our inability to accept and adapt. And that's what people have to realize, that they need to train this mind.
All right, cool.
Totally agree. I think, sorry, Duncan, I was just jumping on the challenge of knowing what products, or digital products in particular, are good and which ones are not. I think it is a real challenge, and it's probably a challenge for us in the industry to try and solve. I know we've been working really hard to try and help come up with a way of helping teachers to understand what more broadly beyond mindfulness, but what social and emotional learning or mental health programs should they be looking at, and for what reason, and where does it fit into the context of their experience in schools. And it's really complex. I think that it's a complex problem across the board in terms of how do you rank, how do you score, how do you compare different products and programs, but it's becoming more and more complex given the proliferation of tools and resources that are provided digitally. So I think it's probably up to us as an e-mental health community, but also at a system level, what are our regulatory bodies and peak bodies doing to try and help us achieve that. I think it's a complex one. I know in Australia there's a big focus at the moment on a digital mental health strategy, and how our digital platform that's funded by the federal government can provide a gateway to other services. But that it's a complex task, and it's going to take a long time. So there's probably not a short-term fix, unfortunately.
One of the challenges in coordinated national responses to things like formal research is it's extremely difficult for them to keep up with changes in the technology industry. One of the ways in which we see that is sometimes that some interventions are better suited for easy adaptation to new platforms than others. I recall the debates back in the time of my clinical psychology training in the 1990s, and then sort of after that, particularly as acceptance and commitment therapy became more popular in New Zealand, looking at randomized controlled trials and whether the design of that kind of research tended to favor certain kinds of interventions, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, more than other interventions that were less easy to manualize. Now, I don't want to reopen that debate, but I am interested in your thoughts on where this fits with relation to mindfulness. Is mindfulness something that is a natural fit for a transition to partly or completely digital delivery as compared to other kinds of interventions? And where are the particular strengths and opportunities for mindfulness, particularly on our digital platforms?
Happy to jump in if no one else has a burning desire to answer. Duncan, it's a great question. I think the digital mindfulness world has actually received a fair bit of criticism from the more traditional mindfulness sector, and there has been a lot of skepticism about whether digital mindfulness programs or products or apps can actually replace or be as good as those more manualized approaches. So Bruce mentioned earlier the mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is a fully manualized standardized approach to teaching mindfulness over an eight-week period with 90-minute weekly sessions and a lot of home practice. And that's where there's a huge range of evidence that has been created out of that manualized approach. When it comes to the digital environment, I think one of the challenges, so we could take that approach and fully digitize it, and many people have, and there's been really good outcomes. But one of the other complexities of digital provision is that people want to engage with it slightly differently. There's that need to integrate it into the rest of our life, and there's also great opportunity with digital technology to actually prompt and nudge and remind people in different ways, so that we're with someone more over that period of time, potentially, than those discrete 90-minute sessions. So there are opportunities, and I think there's also challenges in the digital space, and I fully acknowledge that it's complex, and maybe we've actually made the word mindfulness, it could have actually been complicated, I think, by the emergence of these new technologies and the way that we're using them and the way we're introducing mindfulness, and also the mainstream adoption and interest in mindfulness, that different people will talk or use a different definition of mindfulness in different contexts. So it's quite complex. I think the thing that I return to is, if we can't get someone to participate in a full structured 8-week course, can we get someone to explore mindfulness in a more bite-sized approach? And is there a benefit there? It may not be as beneficial as the 8-week course, or it actually might be as beneficial. So how do we start to test out these approaches and build the evidence base for these digital approaches as well? It's a big
Bruce,
question,
do you want
though.
to add to that? Well, feel free to jump in if you want to, but in the meantime, I'm going to pose to you a related question from Jess Shaw, who's in a busy office, and so has asked me to put this to the panel rather than inviting her to come on audio or video. She originally had a question directed at Craig in relation to some of his material, but it's, I think, more generally relevant as well, which I think you're exactly right, that it can be easier to get people to start with a digital intervention than the likelihood that they might attend a face-to-face service. One of the key challenges with any treatment program, of course, is maintaining that ongoing engagement. And we know that we get an awful lot of that for free when someone's having a face-to-face contact with a clinician who is expert at interpersonal communication, whether or not that's written in that manual, and in being able to judge where someone's at and think about how to draw them back. What do we think about retention rates in these kinds of treatment programs? What those tend to be, does that matter, and how can we manage this challenge of maintaining engagement over time with digital delivery of services?
I have an opinion. I will jump in. It's a really great question, and it's one that we grapple with all the time. How do we keep people engaged? I think, speaking on sort of two hats, first being the clinician hat, and Duncan, to your point around, you're sitting there with someone, you're building a rapport, you're engaging with them, and you're introducing mindfulness one-on-one. I think there is a different response to downloading an app and starting to explore a meditation practice yourself. Having said that, though, I think we, even in a one-on-one environment, a huge number of people don't come back to sessions. They might come to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 sessions. They might not attend the full 8 sessions or 10 sessions. And that period of time between those appointments is always a challenge. I don't know how many clinicians there are on the call, but I know from my experience, and maybe it's just me, but I don't think it is, you would set homework or activity to do outside of those clinical sessions. And the number of times people would come back and say, oh, I was too busy, or no, I didn't get to that, I'm really sorry, or something came up and I didn't get a chance to do that practice, happens no matter what. I think we're humans, and as Craig talked about earlier, I think there is that complacency that sometimes comes over us, and that, or that we just can't be bothered to give it a go, or we're worried or scared about trying something new. Retention rates with the digital platform, like, luckily we can see it. We know how many people come in, how long they stay, when they drop off, and we're always actively working on learning from that. So what are the patterns that we can see from different people? What's the progression that results in the best engagement? How can we build on that? How can we learn from the people that are engaging with our tech platform? Where are the big holes, and are there really big problems with our tech program that we can fix? So I think it is a challenge, but there's also great opportunity, I think, with that digital platform to learn and to evolve and to build and evolve those platforms. If you can, like, I think sometimes technology products are built and they can't change much, and it's really hard to change things. I think we're fortunate at Smiling Mind to have that capability to be able to change things and learn as we go. And the other thing I think around retention is really around that people will come in at different time points with different needs. And I think Craig spoke to this earlier as well, that sometimes we know that there are people that download the app and they use it for a period of time, and then they might disappear for a period of time, but then they come back. And so understanding that humans have different needs at different stages of their life, I think, is also really important. But we don't know whether they're missing, why they go away, and when they tend to come back when they're not feeling so great, which I think is a side effect of how most of us humans operate, that we do things when we need them.
I would just jump in to add that Apple Watch is very helpful in reminding people to pause and breathe. But having said that, I mean, that's only one element or one aspect of mindfulness, because there's a lot of foundational aspects that need to be learned, and that is to do with the change of attitude. And the change of attitude is what really transforms how we perceive the world and how we therefore experience and engage the world. And that may not come through if people are just focusing on doing practices. So I think we need to be mindful of that.
Bruce, go ahead.
Duncan, there was a question there about where GPs can access the online education about mindfulness. I was talking about what the medical students have, and it's at the eMHIC, so the medical degree portal, and they'll see some stuff there, what the students get. I'm not sure if that's behind a pass wall. If it is, ask that person. It's M. Salvador. Just email me personally and I can usher them past that. Yeah, but I'm sure
Excellent.
the other people here could talk about the various mindfulness courses that are available, Craig's one or Addie's one. So there seem to be plenty out there.
Yeah, certainly innovations in how we think about delivering both training and these interventions is important, isn't it? I think that, stage one often is taking the existing things that we used to do and turning them into online or digital delivery. And there's been a lot of that, I guess, with COVID in particular, universities rushing to put things into online courses, some of which they had done before, but others which they hadn't. And likewise, we do a lot of that in our clinical interventions, don't we? Is that often, particularly I think from my academic research background, we take what we think is the existing clinical intervention, the way it's been shown to work in face-to-face delivery, and try and repackage that digitally. David Broadhurst in the comments says, embedding learning is the next evolution to e-learning. So finding ways to embed learning resources in the flow of people's everyday activities is something we need to explore, and visual micro-learning is allowing this to happen in a more meaningful way. I think that resonates with me, the idea that we can start to question what were the assumptions around the way we did things before that were just based on funding models and the kind of pragmatics of in-person delivery, where if someone's going to drive all the way to see me in an office, then I probably should talk to them for at least 50 minutes and maybe leave myself 10 minutes as a clinician to write some case notes, rather than packaging things in the way that might be the most effective. And I still feel like we're a long way from really having fully plumbed the benefits of that in terms of things like engagement. Just a brief personal anecdote on that. I'm very passionate about engagement at the moment in relation to healthcare interventions. My 15-year-old son has had a shoulder subluxation and he's been given exercises by his physiotherapist, very important to strengthen those muscles. But what we know is in many health interventions is the likelihood that people actually follow through on the exercises they're given by a physiotherapist is pretty low. And when we look at his family history, I'm not pointing at anyone in particular in the family, we know that as a younger person, other members of his family weren't necessarily that good in following the advice of physiotherapists. So the digital intervention that I've implemented for my son is this. If he does the exercises for 56 days in a row without missing any, I'll replace the phone battery in his iPhone. So that's my version of a digital intervention, but maybe we can come up with something better. In that regard, maybe you have some thoughts on the ways that we could be overcoming these assumptions around what is required to deliver our treatments digitally, things that we could be looking for the next stage of where we take mindfulness interventions forward in this new environment. Bruce.
I was struck over COVID, so we started doing a lot of online consults, and we're all gung-ho about doing visual ones. But just I work in a sort of poorer part of town, and most people didn't want to have their face shown on the screen. And in the end, I went back to the telephone because it's a hell of a lot more reliable than going through various other channels. So I'd be interested in a little bit of research on that, actually. Like, I mean, maybe some people here know what, how you decide if somebody, but just about everybody said no, and it was irrespective of age. In fact, young people seem to be less keen to be online, and I was all keen to be online, but they weren't. Maybe it was me looking at them, I don't know, but what the issue was. Anyone got a thought on that?
I'm not sure, Bruce. I think, gosh, everyone responds so differently, don't they? I think we've seen the opposite in terms of like the increased numbers of people engaging, but probably because that's the only way that they can actually join our training programs now, whereas you're offering those options. I have definitely seen outside of the health space, like more in the corporate, the workplace space, that people have Zoom fatigue. There's this real sense of, at the moment we're spending all day on Zoom communicating with people through this sort of forum, and while it's amazing, it's definitely exhausting as well. And so there's lots of people that are trying to, circumvent those opportunities where they can to either pick up the phone or to meet face to face. So yeah, it is a challenge. I think.
Well, I had an interesting experience. We have a partners meeting at our clinic, and I come in by Zoom. And when I watch them, they're all talking over each other, which is interesting. What free range humans can do, they can talk over everybody. And I'm trying to get in, and they're taking no notice of me. So with Zoom, you're always having to pause to let people talk, which is stressful. I think you feel on guard. The other thing I noticed, it's much more difficult online to do funny, to make jokes and be funny. It's not quite so. Humor is a little bit more restricted, I think. Whereas if you're with people, you can sort of joke and laugh. And I noticed there's an absence of that. So yeah.
Yeah.
I think the tools are definitely useful, but it needs to be treated as a supplement or a complement, but not the mainstream, because I think that the human contact, it's still crucial for us to feel that, we're living in a real community and that people do care. And somehow it's really hard to show that we care for each other through this Zoom platform. We're just looking at a computer screen. So, we mustn't in any way lose sight of the importance of the human connectedness.
Well, as always, time very rapidly disappears. I don't know if you have Zoom fatigue yet, but whether you are raring for another 30 minutes or not, our time is essentially up. So I just want to thank our three panelists, plus of course, Craig Hassard, who had to leave us earlier, for contributing today. There'll be opportunities for further ongoing engagement in the months ahead. Get in contact with the eMental Health International Collaborative to hear about that more. In the meantime, I'm going to invite Anil Taplial, who briefly spoke to us earlier, to return and give us some concluding comments. Anil.
Thank you, Duncan, and thank you to all the panel speakers, all the participants. I'm sure I'm reflecting everyone's views here. Listening to so many expert speakers, I find it very exciting. So there are so many different perspectives, practical approaches, and my take home is looking at how those practical approaches align with academia, whether it be medical students, curriculum. Second one, which I think was looking at the workplace and population health approaches. The third one, which is very important and seems to be quite a worldwide trend, is looking at primary care, and then of course the young people in schools. So I think that there are so many different approaches, there's so many different perspectives, and so there is no complete sort of a way to round up the eMental health as a total sum. It's just like building a jigsaw puzzle. So eMHIC, as a result, has commissioned special interest groups in different areas. The first one, which many of you would have attended, was on ethics and law in eMental health. Second one is on mindfulness, which we are in right now. There is another one which is coming up, which will be the subject matter for next month's webinar, which will be on strategy, policy, and standards. And I saw a lot of comments within the chat room which pertained to that. There is going to be another one looking at the workforce and implementation, SIG coming up, evidence generation, and there was a lot of chat in today's chat room as well on that. But also what's working, there are a lot of nationally funded initiatives in various countries, in Sweden, in Canada, in the United States, in Singapore, in Australia, New Zealand. What's working at the peak bodies? So what is our experience? Because we are talking about thousands of people accessing these eMental health and addiction treatment solutions every single day. So what's working, and how can we learn from them, and how can we make a better future for respective countries we live in? So another aspect which came up was looking at what Angie said, accepting the new norm. But what is the new norm? And there's a research which I may have shared in, some of you would have seen, that a research points to, it's a UK-based research, how we are using this device, which is our phone. And number one utilization of this device is using text. Number two is WhatsApp. Number three is Facebook. Number four is online banking, the shopping, and making phone from this device is number 11. It did not make it to top 10 activities. So communication has changed. And are we changing the interventions? Because that's where the consumers are. Ian posed a beautiful question earlier on. Do we need to reflect lived experience? That's where people are. That's how people are communicating. Are we speaking that language? Of course, not in just strictly in the sense that is only mode we need to communicate, but that is a way to reach out, engage, and then adding on the human element on top of that for it to work more effectively. So how do we learn from each other? How do we collectively develop this domain further? It's not just about listening to four expert speakers. I personally believe each one of you in this webinar, each one of you listeners, you are all equally experts in this area. So how do we collectively develop the eMental health domain together? And how do we collaborate? And that's why I would like to welcome you and invite you to join eMHIC, which is emhichglobal.com. And it's been a pleasure having you all on this webinar. Thank you so much.